for that too kind introduction. As a way into magic, I thought we would start by looking at some terms that relate to magic, like amazing, as in prepare to be amazed. Wonderful, like you'll be dumb with wonder. And awesome, like you'll be filled with the spirit of awe. But I think through decades of overuse and misuse, words like that have become deflated to mean amazing, like those pants look amazing on you. And awesome, how are your first few bites tasting? Oh my God, awesome. But magic is a term. Magic remains potent. Magic remains weird. And magic is even a little mystical. When the CreativeMornings folks learned about the theme, their first thought was of filmmaking. And I'm just the lucky gal they happened to tap. But why magic and filmmaking? Well, for starters, there's the magic hour, which is that magical time just after sunrise and just before sunset. The light is redder and softer than when the sun is higher in the sky. But of course, that comes into play in photography and painting as well. So why else filmmaking and magic? Well, there's the magic lantern seen here, which is a strong light lens and either a painted image on glass or a photographic image printed on the glass. There's the enchanted cottage, which is one of my favorite terms for the camera. It was coined by cinematographer Jack Cardiff to describe the 35mm camera, which, when fully outfitted with accessories and blimp to buffer sound, was enormous. And then there's Disney magic, which seems to describe this specific brand of magic, a specific way in which we as viewers are touched. But I think most relevant is film is where the magic happens, right? Film is where nightmares and fantasies are built and filmed. Nightmares and fantasies which can last a lifetime, like when my mom saw The Exorcist, right? Yes. Same. Same. Also, the first narrative films were magical in nature. So even if you're not a cinephile, you're very likely to recognize these images. They're from George Méliès's A Trip to the Moon. From 1902, it's very often credited as being the first narrative film, but that's not true. Alice Guy's The Cabbage Fairy actually predates it. Fascinating. Ooh, was that for lady filmmakers? Cool. So in it, you'll see the cabbage fairy magically plucks little children from cabbages, which, as an expectant mother, this is actually a little hard to watch, but it's delightfully bizarre. You know, and she just kind of plops them down. Yeah, I know. The next one is a little harrowing. It's like, ooh. I know, but it predates A Trip to the Moon. So this is actually, so it's bizarre, but it's actually based on a European fairy tale in which boys are plucked from cabbage patches and girls are plucked from roses. Now, however magical feeling films are, they are, of course, these highly constructed works involving lots of people. And sets are generally not magical until they're on camera because they're designed for the camera, right? They're designed for the eye of the camera versus for our eyeballs. Now, we have an exceptional real location here today. It's magical, and I think it's magical here in Blue Ribbon Hall, not just for the individual components of like the carved wood and the hand-painted murals, but I think it's because when you park your car, beep, beep, and you walk in, you're suddenly transported to mid-19th century, near-perfect German Milwaukee. Now, camera likes it as well. It's very attractive to camera's eye, but it could be more attractive to camera's eye. So let's make some magic here. Let's cinematize our set, okay? Mecca lecca hi, mecca hiney ho. Where my Pee-wee fans at? No, sorry, I'm just kidding. But seriously, now the presenter becomes the magician. This is non-toxic, okay? Can't leave you guys out. We'll keep that handy. Thank you. He loves that. He won't make a film without that thing. Okay, that's quite enough. Thank you, thank you. So what have we done here? Obviously, we've added atmosphere in the form of fog, which is activated by the light. I think some people who are very interested in narrative would wonder, where did all that smoke come from? And I guess narratively you could say, well, people were smoking in the back. But I would also say, who cares? Like, we're here to make magic. We're here to make cinema. Obviously, with the lighting design, we now have greater chiaroscuro. And it points the viewer's gaze in a more intentional way than when it was more high key previously, right? Overall, it's more stylized and it's less familiar than we're used to, right? Which is what I think we look to cinema for. And I think the music completes our transport to this other world, to this magical world. And I also really wanted to do a quick change, but it was hard to even find one magical maternity outfit. So, sorry, fell just short. Although I will say, if it was for a film, I would have found 7. But my background is in production design, and for those of you who aren't familiar, production designers, and also known as art directors, are responsible for the look and feel of the film world. Now, generally that's through set and props, but in low and no budget indie filmmaking, which is where I spend most of my time, it also involves wardrobe and hair and makeup. One of my favorite experiences was on Tate Bunker's Studies in Space. It was my favorite experience because there was such a high degree of collaboration between me and the other designers. And it was very, very art heavy, we would say, so we really needed that. This is Blue Ribbon Hall. I'm not sure if you recognize it or not, so this is where you're sitting right now. So we were working on this scene, and I learned that the next scene was going to be just 2 rooms over in the guest center. We knew that there was a female talent dancer, we knew there was a male background figure, and we knew where the camera was going to be, but that was about all we knew. And going into a production of this nature, I knew to gather sort of more talent and more materials than we knew what we were going to use, which came in handy in this instant when I was working on the hot set, so to speak, and needed help from one of the designers. So what I did was I gave Danny Groom, wonderful wardrobe designer, armfuls of this cheap table hula skirt material, and I said, please work on our lady dancer with paying particular attention to movement. And then with our background figure in the scene next door, we found this wooden apparatus, and we didn't know what the purpose of it was, but what we did was we sat him at it, armed him with this block of wood, and put some baby powder on the apparatus to add some movement and to give it some life, add some interest. And then we dressed in, it's hard to see, but we dressed in a bit of straw. And that's to further separate the space from something more familiar, as well as to add some narrative, add a narrative quality. Perhaps this belongs to her, perhaps this is her world, something like that. Add a bit of fog, painterly lighting design, and super smooth camera movement, and that's what we got. Now, magic is not just, film magic that is not just constructed through this high degree of collaboration. It's also found. Magic is also discovered. I like to think of it as when you hear viewers describe a film, constructed magic, folks often say, that was so cool how they did that, versus discovered, as you would see in a documentary, for example, that was so amazing when that happened. But even in the case of the found or the discovered magic, there's always a rehearsed or a studied process. Now, like all lucky filmmakers, I'm very fortunate to have a filmmaking family here in Milwaukee, or today I'll call it a wizarding family. And the wizards that I have had the great pleasure of working under and alongside are Tate Bunker, my husband, and Cecilia Condit. I tasked them, as well as myself, to create some spells for you all, which really are just an insight into their artistic process. So the first is from Cecilia. She's got some words for us. She says, "I work within the psychological landscape of contemporary fairy tales, using the trappings of dreams and poetry to create a splintered reality where I am free to consider the craziness of the world we live in." Here she's going to describe her process, her approach to a work that she's just finished, which will hopefully premiere at a big museum, but I can't tell you the name. The name of the piece is Tales of a Future Past. She says, "I found some wonderful animal masks online, but could I really make a serious film using them? I was uncertain. However, after placing the masks on two friends, I found that the giraffe and zebra masks just came to life. I knew I could make a film about their struggles against extinction. Sometimes art is pure magic." So this was sort of her moment of discovery. And here are some images from the finished film. Sorry about those shadows, everybody. Next, a few words from Tate. He says, "My approach involves merging the beauty of common movements with the mythical to create an innovative style in which neorealism meets magical realism. I strive to discover a film instead of simply creating it." And what follows are images from two features that he has in process. That's right, two features. One of them is from independent feature Depth of Field, working title. I also got to play a title role in that. No nepotism at all, I'm sure. But here you see Veronica Cartwright from The Birds, Aliens, and zillions of other things. And here's an image from an experimental feature. It's a collaboration with artists Shana McCon, Brent Budsberg, called The Inhabitants. And I feel like I should preface my spell by saying that I come from a long line of long-distance runners and coaches. I am not either of those things. However, I do find that coach voice is very helpful to me. I find that mantras are very useful, and that's sort of where my spell comes from. So the first is simply the word joy. I find that I need to remind myself of what inspired me to begin a project in the first place, and to remain open to new sources of inspiration. So as a made-up example, I could say, I began this project because I was enraptured by that little waggle dance that bees do after a successful forage. But, as an example. But what I found was actually more successful and more poignant through working the material is the story of their service and of their sacrifice. Now, what do I mean by joy? I mean a moment of subject-inspired mania. This also takes me back to being 5 and 6 years old and waiting outside Skate World, and you're stuck in line as the session begins, and you can hear the music thumping, and you can even identify what the song is, but you can't get inside. And I think it's that moment before the reward. It's that moment of inevitability. Like that is the greatest pleasure. But an antidote to joy comes to us from Marshall Curry, a documentary filmmaker, as well as others. And he says, if 3 people tell you you're drunk, it's time to sit down. And I think that's true in art and in life. Next, nothing is precious and lose the painting. These are related to me. So nothing is precious. I had this long-haired figure drawing professor who would walk around and say, nothing is precious. Remember, nothing is precious, as we drew. And what I took that to mean was to continue to be bold in your art and your mark making. That the moment you start to fall in love with your work, you start to protect it with more conservative mark making, and in a way you become the enemy of your work, right? And then related to that is lose the painting. So I believe it was Giacometti who said, you have to lose the painting, you have to take it too far to possibly know what the shape is meant to be. Along those same lines, and if I'm ever feeling real low in the art making process, I think of something someone once told me, that your art can be anything. Your art can be stacking actual shit on the side of the road. But if you stack shit high enough, and if you just keep at it with these shit towers, that eventually people are gonna notice. And they can't deny your art so long as you are so boldly insistent. So anytime I'm feeling like I suck or I'm a failure, I just tell myself I'm just shoveling shit right now. And it helps keep me working, and it relieves me of the burden of being great. And then finally, work B. You want a hot body? You want a Bugatti? You want a Maserati? You gotta work, bitch. No excellent art comes without a great deal of hard work. And I want to make excellent work. So anytime I'm feeling like exhausted with the process or like I'm done, I double down. So sometimes that coach voice sounds like Britney Spears, which not proud of, but it's true. As viewers, I'm sure we have all had the feeling of being struck by magic, touched by some film or some piece of art, including to the degree that it changes you in some way. I think one of the greatest challenges we have as artists and as makers is to get inspired by or about something. So in my case, very recently, it was a 5th grade original patriotic musical showcase. And to translate that feeling that you have inside into a magical experience for viewers. How can I, as a filmmaker, give you my experience as a human? I think it's rare and difficult, to say the least, but when it happens, it's magic. Thank you so much.